Greetings and welcome to Mr. Schmidt's online video tutor. Before we start reviewing absolute value equations, let's take a look back at the concept of absolute value itself. If you remember, absolute value has to do with a number line. So let's take a look at one of those. Now, absolute value has to do with where numbers are on a number line. Let's say we take the number 3. Okay, the number 3. And we'll put a circle right there. Okay? Now, how far is that from 0? Well, we can see that the number 3 is 3 units from 0. And if we look at the number -3, which is right there, we can see that that is also 3 units from 0. Remember, distance is always a positive number. You can never be negative. So what we could say here is that the absolute value of 3 is 3, because it's 3 units from 0, and the absolute value of -3 is also 3. Okay? So every time we have an absolute value equation, regardless of whether this number inside the absolute value sign is positive or negative, we always know that our absolute value, or a distance from 0, is always going to be positive. Now, we can use what we know about absolute value to write a very, very basic absolute value equation. We could write something like this: absolute value of x equals 6. Now, in this case, the number in here can be either a positive 6, because the absolute value of 6 is 6, or it can be a negative 6, because the absolute value of -6 is 6. So we could write that x in this case is equal to 6, and x is equal to -6. Notice that this absolute value equation has two solutions. All absolute value equations have two solutions. Now, let's take a look at a slightly more complex absolute value equations. Something like, x plus 3 equals 6. Now remember, we just got done saying that this thing inside here, whatever it is, has to equal either 6 or -6. So what I'm going to do as a result of that is I'm going to write two absolute value equations. And I'm going to do that with every absolute value equation that we're given. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, x plus 3 equals 6, and x plus 3 equals -6. Now these are two fairly simple equations, so I'm just going to use my equation solving skills to solve both of these. Obviously, what I have to do for both of these equations is subtract 3 from both sides and see what we're left with. Well, when I solve this one, I get x equals 3, and over here I get x equals -9. Now in algebra, it's important to say, okay, those are great answers, but are they correct? And we have a way of checking that. We can take both of those numbers, put it back into the original absolute value equation, and see if it works. So let's take 3. We've got absolute value x plus 3 equals 6. So I'm going to take this and put it in here, and I'm going to have absolute value 3 plus 3 equals 6, and obviously absolute value of 6 equals 6. So that answer works. Let's see if the other one does. We've got absolute value x plus 3 equals 6. Now again, we're going to take -9 and put it in here. So we have absolute value -9 plus 3 equals 6. Well, -9 plus 3 is -6. So the absolute value of -6 equals 6. And that answer checks. Both our answers check, so obviously we did our work correctly. Okay, now again we're going to get a little more complicated. But before we do that, I want to go back to, for just a minute, take a look at a simple equation that we all know how to solve. Something like this. 2 plus 1 equals 5. All right? Now, remember we learned one of the rules of solving equations was that wherever our variable was, we had to isolate that on that side of the equation, and our goal was to get rid of this 1 so that we were left with just a 2x on that side. Well, we're going to do the same thing here with absolute value equations that are a little more complicated. All right? What we're going to do is we're going to take something like this. We're going to say absolute value 2x plus 3 minus 4 equals 5. Okay? Now what we want to do is we want to isolate this entire thing right here. So what we want to do then is get rid of this negative 4. Okay? So let's do that. Let's get rid of all these lines here. And we're going to go like this and get rid of that. We're going to go like this and get rid of that. And we're going to get rid of that. Okay, so now we've got this absolute value equation. And what we need to do is get rid of that negative 4. So obviously we're going to add 4 to both sides of this equation. And when we come down here, we have absolute value 2x plus 3 equals 9. Now this looks very similar to what we just did. All right? Now that we have the absolute value expression isolated, we're going to write two separate equations. We're going to say 2x plus 3 equals 9 and 2x plus 3 equals negative 9. Okay? Again, we have to get rid of those 3's, so we're going to subtract 3 from both sides of the equation. All right? And now we go like this, and we've got 2x equals 6 here. And over here, we've got 2x equals negative 12. And obviously, we have to divide through by the 2 in front of the x. And that gives us x equals 3 and x equals negative 6. Now, if we plug those back into the equation, we would then find, in fact, that those are our answers.